can be interpreted as weakness of will, that alone feels like medicine. The doctor packs his bag again, leather creaking softly. Before he leaves, he adds one more recommendation. Avoid stimulants. Avoid worry. Avoid excess. In other words, avoid being human. You watch him go, then turn toward your bedroom. The bottle is in your hand, and the night is waiting. Soon you will discover that Victorian sleep cures are not always gentle little herbs and tonics. Some are stronger. Some are fashionable. Some are downright dangerous in their coziness. But for now, you climb the stairs, listening to the quiet clink of glass in your palm, and you prepare to taste the 19th century's idea of peace. The spoon hovers for a moment in the lamplight, trembling slightly as though it, too, understands that what you are about to swallow is more than herbal optimism. The liquid is thicker than tea, darker than honey, and it carries a faintly medicinal sweetness that suggests someone tried very hard to make danger taste polite. You sip. Warmth spreads almost immediately, down your throat, into your chest, and outward in a slow, persuasive bloom. Your shoulders, previously perched somewhere near your ears, begin a cautious descent. The room softens at the edges. The ticking clock sounds less like an accusation and more like a lullaby that forgot the words. This, you realize, is not valerian. It is laudanum. By the early 19th century, laudanum, a tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, is one of the most widely used medicines in Britain. Opium itself has been known for centuries, but in Victorian times it becomes domesticated, bottled, and astonishingly accessible. You can purchase it from a chemist with relative ease. It is prescribed for pain, diarrhea, coughs, anxiety, and, of course, sleeplessness. Mainstream doctors endorse it, and it appears in household cabinets alongside bandages and peppermint drops. Opium works because it binds to receptors in the brain and dulls sensation, slows breathing, and induces drowsiness. Victorian physicians do not describe it in these biochemical terms, but they observe its effects carefully. It calms, quiets. It invites sleep like a velvet curtain descending over a noisy stage. And so, you lie back, the pillow welcoming you with unusual kindness, and you feel the edges of your thoughts blur. The city outside fades to a distant murmur. Even your earlier anxieties about digestion, morality, and telegraphs vibrating your nerves seem faintly ridiculous. It is, you must admit, effective. But here is the cozy danger. Because laudanum is so widely available, it is also widely misused. The dosage is not always precise. Bottles vary in strength. Some individuals develop tolerance, requiring more for the same effect. Addiction, though not always named as such, becomes an increasingly visible problem. By the mid to late 19th century, opium dependency is recognized among certain groups, including middle-class women who are prescribed it for nervous complaints. Historians still argue whether Victorian society fully understood the addictive potential of opium or whether they preferred to frame dependency as a failure of character. Some doctors warn about excessive use. Others prescribe it liberally, confident in its benefits. The line between remedy and reliance blurs like the gaslit street outside your window. A quirky and slightly unsettling tidbit drifts into your half-drowsy mind. Opium is sometimes given to infants in the form of Godfrey's cordial or other soothing syrups, meant to quiet crying. Yes, babies are essentially offered tiny doses of sedation so their parents can enjoy a peaceful evening. The practice eventually draws criticism, but for a time it is disturbingly common. Victorian parenting occasionally resembles a social experiment. You shift under the blankets. The laudanum hums in your veins. Your breathing slows. It feels as though someone has gently lowered the volume of the world. Writers of the era are intimately familiar with opium. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's earlier struggles with laudanum are well known, and later figures continue the tradition of poetically complicated relationships with the drug. Though not all are Victorian, the cultural memory of opium as both muse and menace lingers. It carries a romantic aura, exotic, Eastern, dreamlike, thanks in part to Britain's imperial trade networks. The opium wars with China in the mid-19th century fought over trade imbalances and the British export of opium, underscore how deeply this substance is embedded in global politics. You, lying in your modest London bedroom, are participating in a vast imperial system with each spoonful. There is gentle irony here. The empire wages war to secure opium trade routes, and you use the resulting product to nap. You feel heavier now. Your limbs sink into the mattress as though gravity has been briefly upgraded. The horsehair stuffing seems almost luxurious. Even the scratchy wool blanket feels like a protective embrace rather than a textile offense. And yet, somewhere in the back of your mind, a question flickers. What happens if the bottle empties? Victorian doctors sometimes recommend laudanum as a short-term solution, just until the nerves settle. But nerves, as you have learned, are notoriously dramatic. They do not settle easily. They crave reassurance. They crave routine. They may even begin to crave the spoon. Some physicians begin to caution against habitual use, noting symptoms of dependency, restlessness without the drug, sweating, agitation. These observations are not yet framed in the modern language of addiction science, but the pattern is visible. There are whispers in medical journals. There are cautionary tales. You turn onto your side, eyelids drooping. Outside, a carriage passes. You barely register it. The laudanum has wrapped the night in velvet. It is a seductive kind of silence. 3 light jokes float lazily through your fading consciousness. That perhaps insomnia is simply your brain demanding applause. That maybe your nerves just need a stern talking to. That if telegraph wires truly run through your body, someone forgot to pay the bill. Your thoughts dissolve before the punchlines land. But not everyone views opium as the perfect solution. By the later decades of the century, new chemical compounds begin to emerge, laboratory-made substances that promise more predictable effects. Science, after all, is advancing. Anesthetics like ether and chloroform have already revolutionized surgery in the mid-1800s. If doctors can render patients unconscious for operations, surely they can manage something as mundane as sleep. The idea of a modern, scientific sedative becomes alluring. Something precise, something measured, something that doesn't carry the same exotic mystique or social stigma as opium. You drift closer to sleep, unaware that the next wave of insomnia cures will arrive in crystalline powders and carefully labeled jars. For now, though, the laudanum does its quiet work. Your breathing evens out. The ceiling blurs into shadow. The fog outside seems distant and irrelevant. You slip under, carried by a substance that is both medicine and empire, comfort and complication. And somewhere, in another bedroom across London, someone else is lifting a similar spoon, chasing the same soft, narcotic promise of rest. When you wake, it is not with the bright satisfaction of a well-rested Victorian citizen ready to conquer the day. It is with the slow, syrupy confusion of someone who has been gently sedated into yesterday. Your mouth tastes faintly medicinal. Your limbs feel heavy, as though the blankets have secretly signed a lease on your body. Still, you slept. And in Victorian London, sleep is a victory worth bragging about at breakfast, right between the toast and the mild existential dread. But laudanum has a reputation. It's old-fashioned, associated with poets, melancholics, and people who keep diaries full of dramatic underlining. The medical world is hungry for something new, something that feels more scientific, more modern, less Eastern and mysterious. A drug you can pronounce without sounding like you've joined a secret society. Enter chloral hydrate. In the late 1860s, chloral hydrate emerges as one of the first widely used synthetic sedatives. It is created in laboratories, not harvested from poppies. It is a chemical invention of the modern age, and Victorian doctors greet it with cautious excitement. Here is a mainstream historical fact. Chloral hydrate was introduced into medical practice as a hypnotic sedative around 1869. After German chemist Justus von Liebig's earlier work and subsequent clinical experimentation, it becomes, for a time, the fashionable sleep drug. The word hypnotic here does not mean stage hypnosis. It means something that induces sleep. The Victorians love scientific-sounding labels. Hypnotic makes the medicine sound like it has a doctorate. You, being a restless soul in an era of restless souls, hear about chloral hydrate from a friend. Perhaps a fellow clerk, pale from office work and moral responsibility. He leans in conspiratorially and whispers that it is marvelous. A spoonful and you sleep like a saint. No dreams. No poetry. Just blank, quiet darkness. This is, in Victorian terms, bliss. So you find yourself once again at the chemist's shop. The air inside smells of sharp alcohol, crushed herbs, and that peculiar sterile scent of glass and powders. Behind the counter are jars with labels in neat script. Camphor, senna, Epsom salts, licorice root. The chemist is half pharmacist, half shopkeeper, half minor wizard. He hands you a small package, wrapped in paper, tied with string. Inside is chloral hydrate, usually in crystalline form, meant to be dissolved in water or mixed into a draft. It looks harmless, white, clean, modern. Like snow if snow came with instructions. At home, you dissolve it carefully. You sip. The effect is different from laudanum. Opium feels warm, dreamy, like sinking into velvet. Chloral hydrate feels clinical. It switches you off. Your mind dims quickly, like a lamp turned down by an impatient hand. You lie back and wait. Sleep comes faster than you expect, almost rudely. One moment you are thinking about your laundry bill and the next you are gone. For Victorian doctors, this predictability is thrilling. Chloral hydrate seems less messy than opium, less likely to cause constipation, less tied to the moral baggage of narcotics. It feels like progress. Medical journals publish enthusiastic reports. Patients praise it. It becomes widely prescribed for insomnia, anxiety, and even conditions like delirium tremens. But of course, this is Victorian medicine, and every miracle comes with a footnote. The debate begins quietly, then grows louder. Some doctors report side effects: headaches, nausea, heart irregularities. Others note that patients develop tolerance and require higher doses. Dependency appears again, wearing a different hat. Historians still argue whether chloral hydrate was initially overprescribed due to scientific optimism or whether doctors genuinely lacked enough long-term evidence to foresee its risks. Either way, the pattern repeats. Society embraces a sedative, then slowly realizes it has invited a rather clingy guest into the nervous system. A quirky tidbit circulates in whispered gossip. Some fashionable circles refer to chloral hydrate as knockout drops. It becomes associated not only with medicine but with scandalous stories, though most patients use it legitimately. Still, the name sticks, and it gives the drug an aura of both convenience and danger. You can almost hear a Victorian aunt clutching her pearls. In some cases, chloral hydrate is mixed with alcohol to increase its potency. This is not recommended by cautious physicians, but people do it anyway, because humans have always been enthusiastic about combining things that should not be combined. The result can be deeper sedation and greater risk. You, however, are careful. You are an upstanding citizen. You take the prescribed dose. You do not chase it with brandy. You would never, not unless the night is particularly loud. And yet, even in careful hands, chloral hydrate can create a strange kind of sleep. Some patients describe waking with grogginess, irritability, or a faint sense of mental fog. It is as if the drug does not merely induce sleep but also drags your consciousness through mud on the way back. Victorian doctors begin to split into camps. Some praise chloral as a godsend. Others warn it is too powerful, too blunt an instrument. A few argue that insomnia should not be treated with chemicals at all, but with lifestyle changes and nervous discipline. Historians still argue whether the rise of synthetic sedatives marked a turning point in medical culture, shifting from holistic routines to pharmaceutical solutions, or whether Victorians always loved a good drug and simply swapped ingredients. The truth is likely both. People have always wanted a quick fix. The Victorians just happen to live in an era when chemistry finally starts offering one. You wake the next morning after chloral sleep and feel rested, yes, but oddly detached. You drink your tea and stare at the cup as though it has betrayed you. The world feels slightly too sharp at the edges. Still, you slept. That is what matters. The temptation is obvious. Why endure sleepless nights when a small white powder can erase them? Why wrestle with anxious thoughts when chemistry can silence them like a stern librarian? But you begin to sense the trap. You notice that on nights without chloral, your body protests. Sleep feels less natural, more like a performance you must force. The bed becomes a stage, and your brain refuses to act unless bribed. This is the Victorian dilemma in miniature. The pursuit of modern comfort creating modern dependency. And as the medical world continues searching for safer, gentler solutions, it turns to yet another category of sedatives, substances that sound less dramatic than opium or chloral, but still carry their own quiet influence. Soon, you will be introduced to bromides and powders, sold across counters with the casualness of candy. Because if you cannot sleep, Victorian capitalism is delighted to help. The next time you step into a chemist's shop, you notice how ordinary the whole business has become. Not the insomnia, sadly, that remains stubbornly personal, but the purchasing of sleep cures? That feels almost routine now, like buying candles or cough drops. You stand at the counter while the bell above the door gives its polite jingle, and you realize that Victorian Britain has turned wakefulness into a consumer market. Behind the counter, the chemist wears an apron dusted with pale powder. He looks as though he has spent the entire day politely portioning out tiny portions of hope. Glass jars line the shelves, their labels neat and confident. Some contain herbs, some contain chemicals. All contain the implicit promise that your restless mind can be handled, measured, and improved. You clear your throat and ask for something milder than chloral hydrate. The chemist nods as if you've requested a less aggressive kind of umbrella. He reaches for a jar marked bromide. Potassium bromide and sodium bromide become widely used in the mid to late 19th century as sedatives and anticonvulsants. This is a mainstream historical fact. Bromides were commonly prescribed for epilepsy, nervousness, and insomnia, especially after their calming effects were observed in clinical practice. Doctors believe bromides reduce nervous excitability, quieting the brain and easing sleep. They are, in a sense, the Victorian equivalent of just take something to calm down, except with more Latin on the label. The chemist measures out a small amount, tapping it carefully into folded paper. The powder is white, unassuming. It looks like flour. You almost expect it to smell like bread, but it smells like nothing at all. An unsettling absence, as though it has already erased its own personality. At home, you dissolve it in water. The taste is bitter, slightly salty, and deeply unromantic. No dreamy warmth like laudanum, no sharp chemical slam like chloral. Bromides feel like bureaucracy in liquid form. They do their work quietly with minimal flair, and they become popular precisely because of that. They are seen as safe, steady, modern. They are prescribed to anxious businessmen, to overwrought women, to students with exam stress. In a world obsessed with nerves, bromides are marketed as nerve soothers. You lie down after taking them, waiting for the familiar struggle. This time, your thoughts do not vanish instantly. They simply slow. The buzzing urgency of your mind becomes a lazy hum. The city outside seems less insistent. Sleep approaches like a polite visitor rather than a battering ram. It is almost pleasant. But bromides, too, have their shadows. With prolonged use, they can cause a condition later called bromism. Symptoms like fatigue, confusion, memory issues, and even skin eruptions. Victorian doctors observe some of these effects without fully understanding the mechanism. They may describe patients becoming dull, apathetic, or mentally sluggish. And so bromides acquire a peculiar reputation. They can make you calm, yes, but perhaps a little too calm. They smooth out the sharp edges of anxiety, but also the sharp edges of personality. A quirky tidbit circulates in the language itself. The term bromide, in modern English, eventually comes to mean a dull or unoriginal person or remark. Many people trace this usage to the drug's reputation for producing a sedated, unimaginative state. It's hard to be witty when your nervous system has been politely smothered with potassium salts. You sip your bedtime mixture and wonder if you are slowly becoming a human yawn. Victorian chemists, of course, do not only sell bromides. They sell powders and pills in an expanding world of patent medicines. Some are genuinely useful. Many are glorified sugar and alcohol. The patent medicine industry thrives in the 19th century, fueled by advertising, testimonials, and the public's hunger for self-treatment. You see posters in shop windows promising restful sleep in minutes. You read pamphlets describing miraculous cures for nervousness, melancholy, and sleeplessness. Some contain opiates. Some contain alcohol. Some contain nothing of note except an impressive label. The chemist might offer you sleeping drafts already mixed, sold in small bottles with reassuring names. The language is gentle, calming, soothing, tranquilizing. Nobody wants to say, "This will knock you out." That would be vulgar. Victorian marketing prefers to imply you are simply returning to your natural state of refined repose. There is also a booming market for nerve tonics. These are often mixtures containing ingredients like valerian, gentian, kola nut, or even cocaine in some later formulations. Yes, cocaine, which in the late 19th century is still being explored as a medical stimulant and anesthetic. The era's pharmacy shelves are essentially a chemistry experiment with better handwriting. Historians still argue whether the rise of over-the-counter remedies empowered ordinary people to manage their health or whether it led to widespread misuse and dependency. Likely both. For many Victorians, a chemist's shop is more accessible than a physician's consultation. A bottle of sleeping mixture might cost less than a doctor's visit. It is tempting, practical, and just dangerous enough to keep things interesting. You, meanwhile, become familiar with the rituals of purchase. You step up to the counter. You ask in a low voice. You receive a folded packet or bottle. You pay. You leave. It feels almost like participating in a secret society of tired people. And in a way, you are. At night, the powders sit on your bedside table like small white promises. The lamp glows. The curtains hang heavy. Your mind hovers between hope and skepticism. You take the bromide again, and the world softens. Your eyelids droop. You feel yourself sinking